Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our just general joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainable design as well. I've got a very exciting guest today. I want to introduce you to Sarah Heppinstall. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Sarah is with Canadian Tire. So all the Canadians who listen, they're all going, oh, cool. And the people outside of Canada are going, what's Canadian Tire? And basically it is a major sort of hardware and a very sort of eclectic retailer and absolutely a Canadian institution. And Sarah is in charge of construction and building maintenance. And it's an absolute joy to have her here. Let's start, Sarah, by learning about you personally first. Tell us about your background. And tell us how you ended up in this role as Vice President of Construction and Facilities with Canadian Tire.
Certainly. So as you hear me talk, I am not a Canadian native born. So I am from England. And so my schooling is in project management. And I had a number of roles in England as an owner representative. So I did things from running program management offices for banks, fitting out their retail spaces, to fitting out prisons and everything in between. So quite a varied amount of things I did in England. And then 13 years ago, I moved from London, England to Edmonton, Alberta, and worked for Collier's Project Leaders. And so I did a lot of strip malls for them. So those that are local to Canada will maybe know the Brewery District in Edmonton. So I was the project manager for that, which was amazing, doing a combination of heritage buildings and new strip malls. And then moved to Calgary with First Capital REIT. So I was starting to get more of a landlord feel, which was great to go from an owner rep to actually being a landlord. And they're a suburban retail landlord. So thinking about strip malls throughout most of Canada. So I was with them in Calgary, heading up their construction team, and they kindly invited me over to Toronto, and I ended up being their vice president of construction, which was wonderful to be able to oversee a number of landlord-driven construction. And then I decided I wanted a real challenge, and I love retail at its core. Retail is so fast-paced, and you really do have to think about the humans that use the buildings because it's retail and it's all about customers and driving sales. And so an opportunity came up at Canadian Tire. And as you rightly said, Joe, Canadian Tire is an institution here. And so I'm the vice president of design, construction and maintenance for them with teams across Canada. And I absolutely love what we do.
Right on. Now, so we should talk a little bit more about Canadian Tire. So, think a relatively large retailer. You've got the automotive section. You've got, hunting, fishing, you've got sports, everybody comes to Canadian Tire to get their skates sharpened, right? Like everybody in Canada. But, I just came from Canadian Tire buying some Christmas decorations. Like you can buy pots and pans there too. It's an incredible store. So, Sarah, is there anything that you can add there to describing the store, just so, again, the non-Canadians can understand this amazing operation?
So maybe I'll start back from its beginnings. So it's founded in 1922 by two brothers, John William Billis and Alfred Jackson Billis. And they had a really simple idea, which was to make automotive parts accessible to everybody. And then it just grew from there. So those that are in Canada will know that it's a dealer model. And you're right, Canadian Tire becomes the place that you go for your moments. So everyone has an emotional connection. So be it most people, if they grew up here, bought their first bike in Canadian Tire. Yes, you're going to go live in university campus. You're going to go to Canadian Tire to get supplies. Canadian Tire there is for all of those moments that you have in life. And we'll get into the conversation. They're also there for all the emergencies that occur, especially when we have some of the weather events that are occurring. And we're about $16 billion enterprise with over 1,800 locations because we have Canadian Tire, we have Sport Check, which is more around team sports, Marks, which is around your workwear, Part Source for all of your pieces that you need for your car. It even has its own bank and it has a real estate arm as well, CT REIT. So it really does have a plethora of different offerings to offer to Canadians.
Wow, I didn't realize you guys were connected to. I knew Sport Check was in there because they always ask for my triangle card whenever I'm in, but I didn't realize that Marks was tied in there too. Okay, let's talk about your role in some detail. So, do you get involved with design, Sarah, or do you focus entirely on the implementation of these designs?
So my team look after the prototypical design. So when I say that, I mean, explain it simply. If you took a building fully finished, if you picked it up, turned it upside down and shook it upside down, everything that falls out is a different team, but everything that stays that you can put back again, my team create the design standards around that. And then it's another team that will put it together to be project specific. And then it comes back to my team to build it. But I look after that base building, as most people would know it, the rules that go around that base building.
All right, so tell us a little bit about, I'll say, the guiding principles for the way your store is laid out and designed. And I mean guiding principles in terms of, the basic layout, but, what are the things that need to be there in order to make it the kind of store that Canadian Tire customers want to come in and participate in?
Definitely. So the biggest design driver is customer first. We have to be a customer first organization to make sure that the customer's having a good experience. And that's from the moment that you are driving in or near the Canadian Tire and you want to come in and park at the parking lot. We get very fixated on the building, but that's not the start of the customer journey. We've got to think about how they park, how they're then able to get into the building. And then we start to look at the design inside of the building. We've got to be on brand. So every 10 or so years, we will refresh the concept that goes into that building to make sure that it's really showing the brand that we want to be and the brand that we are today. And then, of course, economically viable. So we're always having that pull-push tension around what we would love to do and aspirations versus what we can do in terms of the market that's affordable right now. And we do that through a number of different levers. But what I will say is, and I'd love to share with your listeners, what I'm excited about, we've just launched recently for prototypical design, is we've moved into, rather than having a very static floor plan. So you talked around adjacencies of, where a customer would shop hardware versus homeware versus car parts. We've actually taken the prototypical design through a 3D model and we've broken it up into, we call it kit of parts, but it's like pieces of Lego. So then each part, you can then be very flexible to deal with whatever store you have to, shrink it or expand it. And we have rules around adjacencies of how customers will shop and their experience there. And don't forget the staff, they've got to be able to replenish. So we've got to think about all those back of house adjacencies. We've created these building blocks or kits of parts that we've just launched so that the team can start to be in the 3D model. And we're seeing great efficiencies and benefits throughout the construction process by using these kit of parts in a 3D language.
Okay, so you're making it easier for people to find what it is that they need. Okay, now what about like the comfort while they're in there? Thermal comfort, visual comfort, fresh air, those kinds of things. Do you have an actual document that spells out the standards in terms of customer comfort?
We do indeed. So we've got a whole specification piece that will talk to high efficiency LED lighting and control. And we even go so far, Joe, as to say that we regularly run RFPs so that we can go out and make sure that we've got, 2 to 3 suppliers that can provide us a fixture that meets our brand, but meets our requirements for lumen levels within the store. Because of course you need a nice bright store. Interesting fun fact. Some of these LED fixtures are now so efficient, we actually only end up running them at 70% because if you put them on 100%, you blind everybody in there. So right. We definitely have all of that. We talk about our values and we're constantly reviewing the efficiency of our installation. HVAC systems, we again RFP those out to make sure that we're using high efficiency pieces. And I'll talk a little later around some of the fun things we're doing for pilots to decarbonize our mechanical systems. And then white reflective roofing. Canadian Tire has installed 1.6 million square feet of white cool roofs and 41,000 square feet of green roofs within certain stores to try and deal with that thermal comfort, but also, of course, the solar gain that's given. And then we're also looking at a number of things, on-site solar panels to also implement on top of our roofs to be able to try and deal with some of the energy usage problems that, of course, we have.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Right. Okay. That's really interesting. Are you moving towards like a net zero scenario, Sarah, or is that off in the distance at this point?
We are indeed. So
Okay.
we've got a couple of stores that we did elements of net zero as we just tried to dip our toe into it and understand how that would play out in the building design. But just 2 months ago, we opened up a brand new store in Kelowna, British Columbia, and that is fully net zero ready. And so we're currently getting our certification from the CABGBC. And
Right.
anyone who's able to be in that Kelowna store, it's not only a beautifully functioning net zero, it is a gorgeous building with our latest concept.
Oh, right on. It's funny. It was my next question. I was just going to ask if you use any sort of sustainability certifications or anything like that. But CAGBC, that means you're going for LEED certification. Was it gold, platinum? Which level did you go for?
Gold.
Gold. Right on.
Yeah. And our recent distribution center, actually, it doesn't just stop at the stores. Our recent distribution center in Calgary is also LEED Gold.
LEED Gold. Right on. Oh, very cool. All right. So let's talk a little bit about employees. We talked about customers. Is there anything that you guys mandate in terms of comfort, productivity, health for your employees related to the buildings?
So I do say that natural light is something that we do consider within our design. And so for anyone who's in a newer Canadian Tire store, you will actually see at high level, there is a strip of glazing that runs on the entirety of the front and the sides of the store. And that is done on purpose because most of our staff areas are on a mezzanine. And so we want to make sure that, staff who are taking their lunch, that they are in an area that has access to natural light. They're not just in a box with only artificial light. It's very good for mood, as we all know, boosting productivity. And so newer stores definitely have natural light to some of those rest breaking areas for both the technicians and for the store staff.
That's what's happening. I've always wondered. I go into the store in Sydney, which is a relatively new store in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and it's a big one. It's like a 60,000 foot store maybe, and you've got that strip of clear story right across the front running the whole way, but you can't see it from the inside. There's the obstruction, but the obstruction is the office, the staff area. That now I get it. All right. That's really cool. I like that. All right. Let's talk project management for a second. Let's go back to the day when you really got your hands dirty. I'm guessing you don't get your hands too dirty on, filling out Gantt charts or anything like that. So even if you do, tell us about like some of your favorite tools that you used in managing projects.
You are right, Joe. I don't get to get my hands dirty very often, but when I do, I love it. Like I do strategy now, but there's nothing like being on site. I'm pretty old school around liking the fundamental basics. We can get very lost right now in AI tools and various other things. But one of my favorite tools is good old fashioned meeting minutes.
Okay.
Meeting minutes are so powerful because they do create this record of what was discussed. And I know there's now AI tools that are out there, but for any project managers listening, I highly encourage to make sure that at least once a month, you are actually physically taking the minutes in meetings that you're at. And it's such a good tool we don't want to lose because your skill to be able to listen and synthesize back information around what was discussed in that meeting is absolutely key no matter where you go. I spend all my day now taking large, vast amounts of data and synchronizing it down for various different audiences, especially executives. And I link that to my ability to do meeting minutes when I was a junior PM running around doing all of those things. And for those that have been in a dispute, meeting minutes are one of the key documents that you end up going back to look at what got discussed. And if you disagree, well, that's the record and that's what it is.
I like that. I like that a whole lot. Do you use any of the sort of, AI-based tools or any of the more modern tools, Sarah, like for other things that are actually useful to you?
We do, yeah. So Canadian Tire has a partnership with Microsoft. So we are heavily doubling down on Copilot to be able to help. And they still definitely have a place. So meeting minutes example, we do record our meetings, but I say that they're there as a check rather than replacing the core tool. We are continuing now to see how AI can help. But of course, we use Microsoft Project to help us create Gantt charts and all of those things. And we're using SharePoint, for example, of how we push information around. We have a whole project management handbook about how we expect our project managers to deliver their projects. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Nova Scotia or you're in Kelowna, BC, the project manager is delivering the project the same.
Right on. Okay. That consistency is very important. Let's talk about waste and packaging. I had a brief look at your ESG report, the most recent one. It talks about reducing waste, reducing packaging, reducing emissions across operation. Is there a role that you play in that initiative?
So my team more are on the retail side. So my role very much looks at those greenhouse gas emissions. So as you'll have seen, we have a 40% reduction in scope 1 or 2 greenhouse gases by 2030, which is taken from a 2020 baseline. And so we're tackling this in a number of ways. I am pleased to say that by 2021, we'd already reduced it by 22%. And right now we're knee deep in road mapping what these last 5 years look like to get us to that 40% reduction. And we're doing it through a number of means. But from my point of view, that is definitely looking at building resiliency and decarbonising both our existing and our planned projects. I can say though, from the rest of the team, plastic, packaging and plastics, we're continuing to look at 30% average recycled content in our plastic packaging. We do have a number of our own brands at Canadian Tire. So I call out, for example, you may have bought, Joe, something like Perdono. Perdono is actually a Canadian Tire brand. And so we have a lot more control over that packaging and plastics. And so we're looking to eliminate PVC and styrofoam, for example, in all of those pieces. And then our operational waste, we continue to push that. So CT so far has a 90% diversion of waste from our distribution centres. And retail stores were around 85% overall reduction in operational waste, and we're diverting it to be recycled.
Oh, amazing. I'm going off script a little bit here, Sarah. You just mentioned something that I want to circle back on. I have to. You mentioned resilience. Tell me about the sort of things you face with resilience in Canada. Things are changing. It's unambiguous. Nova Scotia's had flooding for the first time. We've had forest fires, first time I can remember, and I'm pushing 60. So there's definitely some changes. What specific things are you concerned about for your stores that you need to make design changes or at least preparations for?
So I can't relieve too much right now, Joe, because we're literally going to be in 2026 reviewing our prototypical design to address just this. Okay. So you're right. We're seeing my hat of maintenance. My extraordinary losses budget is being tested to a degree it hasn't before because of the numbers of floods and wildfires. So if you think, for example, we have emergency preparedness plans when we know there's a wildfire coming, we need to shut down our HVAC so we're not sucking in that smoke. We need to do a number of things and we need to prepare the stores at the store level to be able to do that. So what can we do as in a building design point of view to already help the store go through all of that? I don't have the answer right now. We're going to be looking at it in 2026, but it's something that we're, like many retailers, but Canadian Tire, you said it at the start of here, Canadian Tire is a place where you go when there's an emergency. So we can't be shut. So how do we, even the extreme, we're even looking at how do you do pop-up stores outside in your parking lot if the building itself is unsafe to go into, while still keeping our employees safe that are serving the customers.
Right. Yeah. And again, for the non-Canadians, sometimes a shovel is life-saving, literally a snow shovel. So Canadian Tire is the first place I think of when I need a snow shovel. So yeah, again, the people who have a different climate may not recognize how much of a life and death sort of situation some of these seemingly small things can actually be. So that's interesting. Resilience. The temperature changes, rising in some of the stores. So you've got stores in the north, I assume, relatively northern locations, and there's places where permafrost is starting to melt and those kinds of things. I can see the look on your face right there. Can you tell us a story or two about, how you've had to manage, or even just what you're facing right now that you're still trying to figure out in terms of those kinds of changes?
Indeed. I think we've got every climate zone that Canada has, we have a store there. And so, as we try to battle that push-pull around sustainability and the operations of the store, so one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're piloting air source heat pumps. but we are doing them dual fuel because the technology is just not quite there yet to be able to allow us to be fully electrified. So if we have, I think about the store that we've just renovated recently in Yellowknife, which for those non-Canadians is very northern Canada, and they get very cold. We need to have that gas backup to help them. And so we utilize local architects and engineers. So we can do so much in the prototypical design, but then we'll also employ local architects and engineers to help us really understand, what do I need to do for this specific store to make sure that my staff and my customers are okay in Yellowknife and they can still have a good experience through all of that. And as I allude to, we're going to do a lot of work of that, to be honest, next year. Right now, we're putting together all the guidelines to set us up for success of how we can be very specific to markets, but we've got to do that hard work still.
Right. So next year, you're preparing the design for the next generation. Okay. So the rollout would be like 27 or 28, or what's the sort of timeline for all of that, Sarah?
It's going to end up being 28 to 29 because if you think about, for those non-Canadians, the municipal process in Canada does take some time. And so by the time you've gone through the two-stage permitting process, and then, you've done your full design and then you execute on site, and that may take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, then that's what causes the lag. So you're really not going to feel it in a store till 28, 29 at the earliest.
Wow. Yeah. It's cool to be able to think that far ahead, for sure. And it's lovely to see people planning that far ahead. But it's really, I don't know, for people who aren't in the industry, those kinds of timelines seem like, holy cow, that's forever. Especially everybody's got their minds around AI now, which is changing so rapidly, and technology is changing so rapidly that we lose track of, some of these bigger infrastructure type things. They just take a long time, and it's weird for people. Is there any sense of urgency in what you're doing for the redesign, Sarah? And if so, what are the things that would drive that sense of urgency?
There 100% is an urgency because weather events are becoming more frequent and more common. And we need to make sure our stores are open to serve our customers when they need us most. So that's exactly why we're doubling down on understanding resiliency so that we can continue to do that. And flooding and fire are our two biggest ones. And we can't even forget the insurance market. So the insurance market, as that continues to add, an operational cost pressure, we need to be able to respond to that by showing how we can make sure that our buildings aren't damaged too much, or that we can still operate those during one of those emergency scenarios.
Right. Now let's go on the positive side of that. Like, are there any sort of material innovations or changes in terms of understanding of consumer behavior that you're looking forward to implementing because it's all upside as opposed to reacting to something negative?
One of the things we are looking at quite a lot is, and this is actually, the dealers lead this a little more. So as a reminder, the Canadian Tire stores themselves are a dealer model. One of the big things we do seasonally is we sell plants. So that might be your soil, your mulch, and your plants. And for those that have shopped there, will have probably shopped in the garden centre. We continue to look at what is the most viable material that we can use for those garden centres. They have been a polycarbonate for a long time. Then we've actually looked at glass as an alternative. They come with a problem, though, in terms of loss prevention, because they're not the easiest to secure. And then there's obviously a heat loss problem too. And so that is one area that we are continuing to review. And right now we're doing a mixture of all of those things that I just talked about to make sure that we understand those buildings. In terms of the building, construction costs are still continuing to rise. And so we still need to be able to have a building that functions correctly in terms of insulation from an R value, but we also need to still make it look pretty nice. So we're playing around with looking at options such as, instead of putting cultured stone on the front of our building, can we put stamped concrete that's coloured? Right. Can we look at ACM panels? ACM panels, whilst they do function very well from an insulation point of view, they're susceptible to damage very easily. And in a high traffic area, they're a problem. So again, can we look at a different material there that we are again playing with at the moment? Right now, we use ACM and we use stone and we use stucco and we have some tilt-up concrete that we just paint, and they're a combination thereof. And we'll continue to look at various materials that we can use.
Forget the old paradigm that privacy means darkness. With Solera translucent glazings, architects can design spaces that are private, filled with natural light, and visually stunning. It's time to rethink how buildings work and feel. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Right on. Yeah, very cool. All right, Sarah, let's ask you to be a mentor for a minute. What advice would you give to the next generation of project managers?
It's a great question, and I love this question. Again, fundamentals for me. The biggest difference between a mediocre project manager and a really good project manager is their ability to walk onto the project site and tell you right away whether you're on schedule. And the only way you can do that is by standing on site. So all of the up and coming, it doesn't matter what level you are as a project manager, if you are still on site, it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or not, you maybe come from one of the best project managers I ever worked with. She had a geography degree. And so she would just stand on site. She'd watch the trades, drill the piles, pour the concrete, stand steel, lay tiles, do all of that. And so she had a really good understanding of what humans took to put this building together. So then you can walk on site and go, I know the general contractor's telling me that this is okay, but it's not okay. I know it's not okay. And so my biggest advice for project managers is get out from your desk and go and stand on site and talk to people about what's really going on with your project.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I have to share an example. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I worked as a process engineer in Southern Ontario for many years. And the guys that were really good at that job, they'd get to the plant, into the operation in the morning, and they would walk through the control room and they would look at all of the instruments, every single one. And they'd say, that says 23 degrees, and that normally says 21.5 degrees. We've got a problem. Right? They just knew where everything should be and how it should be. And the moment there was a difference, they reacted to it. So it's a very similar thing. It's that ability to recognize when something is not where it should be or not how it should be. Does that sound like conceptually similar idea?
Oh, it definitely does. Yes. Yeah. It does take time to do that, but the quickest way to do it is literally to just go in and go observe what people are doing and go ask them. You'll find most people love talking about what they're doing.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I love the old school talk. That's for sure. All right, Sarah, we've come to a moment that you cannot escape. Before we went on the air, Sarah was like, do I really have to answer this question? And I said, yes, you do. You have to. So I'm going to be a big meanie and force her to answer the $1 million question that I ask every single guest. And I ask them to answer this question from whatever perspective they'd like. So Sarah, what makes a great building?
To me, a great building is something that creates a conversation. So dating where we're having this chat right now, Frank Gehry has just recently passed away, which is very sad. At university, I studied Frank Gehry and his architecture because it was a statement. And to me, it doesn't matter whether you're driving past it, you're walking past it, so whatever scale it's at, a great building creates a conversation, be it good or bad, but you should have an opinion about it. It shouldn't just be, meh, there's another whatever.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Yeah. Look, for somebody who didn't want to answer that question, that was a really terrific answer, Sarah. That's a really terrific answer. Okay. Before I go, I usually ask if anybody has any big announcements or anything that like to share, but you've kind of shared a lot of interesting news going forward during this conversation. So I'll just leave it to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end?
I want to thank you very much for having me on, Joe. It's been great to chat through these things and the exciting stuff that's happening within Canadian Tire. I just ask for anyone who's in Canada or visiting, pop your head in and see what you think. Now I've explained a little bit more about what goes into putting a store like that together. And so maybe have a think around what is going on in that store and how we're trying to be a little more mindful towards customers. Because I think sometimes retailers forget who they serve, and ultimately it is the customer.
Wonderful. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Joe.
All right, take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.